What is going on, guys? Today I'm going to be talking about my top 10 least favorite commanders to play against are. Now, these aren't necessarily the most powerful commanders in the format. These are just the ones that I personally do not like to play against. They either slow down the game, they take too long on their own turns, or they're just incredibly powerful and extremely hard to beat and are unfun as a result. Alright, let's get into this. Okay, so coming in at our number 10 spot, I have Edgar Markov. So Edgar is a 6 mana 4/4 first strike haste vampire knight. He says whenever he attacks, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on each vampire you control, but that is the least of your worries when you're playing against this guy. So Edgar has the Eminence ability. So Eminence means that if Edgar is on the battlefield or in the command zone, you get to do his effect, which is whenever you cast a vampire spell, you get a 1/1 black vampire creature token. Now, the Eminence ability, there's a cycle of legends that have it. It's extremely overpowered. Basically, you start the game with this emblem, essentially, that says whenever you cast a vampire, you get a 1/1. It's too strong. It's not fun to play against. It's uninteractable. Even if you kill the Edgar, they'll always be able to get vampires. Now, this is probably the most fun, the fairest on the list. It is number 10. But still, playing against it, it's very interactable. I mean, you can wipe the board, you can kill them, you can do whatever you want. But if they have a couple of vampires in their hand after the board wipe, they just cast them and they can rebuild their board state extremely fast. Eminence, I'm happy that it has not made a return since the first time it was seen because it is just too strong. So coming in at our number 9 spot, I have Yuriko the Tiger Shadow. So Yuriko is a 3 mana 1/3 human ninja that says whenever a ninja you control deals combat damage to a player, you reveal the top card of your library, put that card in your hand, and then each opponent loses life equal to that card's mana value. So on the surface, this card is pretty fun, pretty fair, and should play out pretty well. The problem with Yuriko is the fact that it has Commander Ninjutsu. So Ninjutsu, you can return an unblocked attacker to your hand, and then you may Ninjutsu out the Yuriko. And you can switch the places with the attacker with the Yuriko. The problem here is that there's no commander tax for the ninjutsu ability. So no matter how many times you end up killing the Yuriko, they're always going to be able to play it for 2 mana, which just makes it extremely unfun to play against. No matter how many times you kill it, it's always going to be 2 mana. They're always going to be able to replay it seemingly the next turn every single time. And the damage that it does may not seem like a lot, but it'll add up, especially the fact that the Yuriko is never going to get more expensive, so every turn they're threatening to almost use it. Alright, so these next 3 spots on the list kinda are all play out similar, but for number 8 we have Korvold Feycurse King. So Korvold is a 5 mana 4/4 flying dragon. He says whenever he enters the battlefield or attacks, sacrifice a permanent. And then whenever you sacrifice a permanent, you put a +1/+1 counter on him, and you draw a card. So this card and the next 3 I said, they're all basically extreme value engines. As soon as the Korvold player plays the Korvold, they're going to end up drawing probably in between 5 to 10 cards immediately. It is extremely broken with treasure tokens. Every time you sacrifice a treasure, you're going to get a counter and a card. Any time you sacrifice a creature, you're going to get a card. I'm sure there's more fair ways to play the Korvold deck, but every single time I've seen it cast, they end up having 5 to 6 treasures. They instantly draw a new hand, and at that point, it's almost unbeatable. As soon as the card enters the battlefield and resolves, the damage is done. They've already drawn a new hand. Maybe they've drawn 20 plus cards, and it just gets insanely value. It's hard to beat, and also if the Korvold sticks around, their turns can take forever. There's going to be so many triggers. They're going to have so many cards. They're going to make so much treasure. And it's just a big engine. It's hard to stop. And that's what makes it unfun in my opinion. Alright, so the number 7 spot on this list goes to Tatyova Benthic Druid. So Tatyova is a 5 mana 3/3 merfolk druid. And it says whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you gain a life and draw a card. So similar to the Korvold, as soon as Tatyova enters the battlefield, their turns can take forever. So not only will they get an insane card advantage, but the card incentivizes them to do that by getting more lands in play. More lands equals more cards, equals more things to cast. This deck, I've seen 20 25-minute turns out of this deck. It's insane. They end up having 15 to 20 lands in play. They play extra turns, and it just takes forever. They have so much card advantage that even if you kill the Tatiova, they can just replay it. They've played already so many lands. They can pay for the tax, and it is just extremely slow. Sometimes they don't even have a win condition necessarily. They just have 30 cards in their hand and no win in sight. All right, and then at the number 6 spot, this is our last commander that's in the realm of just unlimited value town. We have Chulane, Teller of Tales. So Chulane, 5 mana, 2/4, it has vigilance. He says, whenever you cast a creature spell, you draw a card, and then you may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield. You can also pay 3, tap it to return a creature you control to its owner's hand. So Chulane is a combination of just a design mistake. So the payoff and the enabler are both on the same card. So Chulane wants you to cast creatures, and he'll draw you cards. But he also has a way on him to return creatures to your hands to do it in the same turn. And similar to the Tatiova, he draws you a lot of cards, but he puts the lands onto the battlefield at the same time. So he enables himself, so you can just keep drawing cards, you can keep playing lands immediately, and then you can just keep playing more creatures. This deck takes forever. The Tatiova deck takes forever, but the Chulane deck takes sometimes even longer. It is absolutely ridiculous. You have players taking 15-minute turns, which is completely unfun, especially in a 4-player game. You don't want one player taking half the game time, and it's impossible to beat. Once they have like 50 creatures in play, they have a full hand of 30 cards. There's essentially nothing that you can do to stop it at that point. So next on the list at the number 5 spot, I have Send Triplets. Send Triplets is a 5 mana 3/3 human. It says at the beginning of your upkeep, choose target opponent, and then this turn that player can't cast spells or activate abilities. They play with their hand revealed, and you may play lands and cast spells from that player's hand. So when you play Commander, you build a deck because you expect to play the deck and play your cards, but the Send Triplets just allows the Triplets player to play your deck for you. And they just play all your cards, they have all your fun. But another thing about this card that makes it unfun is that you only choose one opponent. So although it's less powerful choosing one opponent, it means that only one opponent is being singled out, and only one opponent is getting all their cards played. And it's not like you get those cards back once your opponent plays them. I mean, they're playing the cards from your hand, and then whenever it is your turn, you can't even really cast anything because they usually cast all your good stuff. Extremely unfun, and it's even more unfun for the one specific player that got targeted. And usually it's the same player that gets targeted multiple turns in a row, and you're practically getting your turn skipped at that point. You're getting all your spells played for you. And at our number 4 spot, I have Jin Kataxis Progress Tyrant. So Jin Kataxis is 7 mana 5/5 Phyrexian. It says, whenever you cast an artifact, instant, or sorcery spell, copy that, and you may choose new targets for the copy. It also says, whenever an opponent casts an artifact, instant, or sorcery, it gets countered for the first time each turn. So this is one of those cards where I could definitely see certain builds of it being fun. A lot of artifacts. Doubling your artifacts, doubling your instants would be pretty fun. But the only builds I've ever seen of this deck just revolve around extra turn spells. And once you have the Jin Kataxis in play, you cast one Time Warp, and you take 2 extra turns. And then usually they chain the extra turns, the turns after that, and it just turns into solitaire. The Jin Kataxis player just takes 5, 6, 7 turns in a row. They play the game all by themselves, and it's extremely uninteractive. I mean, no one else is even playing the game at that point. And usually once they cast the first extra turn spell and have 2 extra turns, most of the table just concedes at that point anyway. And at the number 3 spot, we have Grand Arbiter Augustin IV. So Grand Arbiter is a 2/3 for 4. He says white spells you play cost 1 less to play, blue spells you play cost 1 less to play, and then spells your opponents play cost 1 more to play. So Grand Arbiter is not that bad on the surface, but he's just kind of a placeholder commander for any deck that's mainly built around stacks. Stacks being the playstyle of just preventing your opponent from doing things efficiently, slowing down the game, and just making the game really slow and unfun for everyone besides the Stacks player. Other Stacks commanders also that could be on here is like Derevi, but no one likes to play against Stacks. You play Commander to play a social 4-player game, and to get it slowed down by decks, this is usually the main Stacks commander, is not something that you want to be doing for 2 hours of your time. There's just other things that you could be playing other than decks that just slow down the nature of the format. And at our number 2 spot, I have Narset Enlightened Master. So Narset is a 6 mana 3/2. It has first strike and hexproof. And then Narset says whenever it attacks, exile the top 4 cards of your library. Until end of turn, you may cast non-creature spells from among them without paying their mana cost. So Narset, similar to the Jin-Gitaxias, it's just extra turns. That's all it is. If the Narset gets to attack, they're going to end up casting an extra turn spell for free, which will then allow them to attack with the Narset on that turn again, usually hit another extra turn spell, and the cycle just continues. If you've found a little bit of a trend, I don't really like decks that the win condition is multiple extra turns in a row, because it is very slow, it is very unfun. Sometimes they might even not necessarily win with the extra turns, but if they hit an extra turn spell off the Narset the first time, I usually just concede because you don't want to sit through this turn. It's going to take forever. Also, the Narset just having hexproof on the card makes it extremely difficult to interact with. The only way you're getting saved against the Narset deck is if the Narset player cast it and then somebody in the turn rotation that following turn can cast a board wipe. That's the only way to get rid of it. You can't target it. So, yeah, Narset, unfun, extra turns, takes forever. Again, I'm not saying that you can make a... there's ways to make fun Narset decks to play against. You can put a bunch of cool spells in your Narset deck, but the majority of them are just extra turns and just take forever. And at the number 1 spot, the worst commander to play against, in my opinion, is Turgid, God of Fright. So Turgid is a 5 mana 4/5 with Menace, and she reads, whenever an opponent sacrifices a non-token permanent or discards a permanent card, you may put that card onto the battlefield under your control. So Turgid is just, if the target player has the Turgid in play for 1 turn and they get to untap with it, usually the game is over. They're going to cast either a wheel effect, which is going to make everybody discard their hand, and then they're going to immediately get all the permanents from every player's hand onto the battlefield, or they're going to cast a mass sacrifice card to gain all the permanents in play. The play pattern with Turgid is always the same. They always just, if they untap with it, they're going to get everything every single time. The linear play makes it extremely unfun. Once you see the Turgid thing happen 1 time, usually you do not want to play against it again. So that is my pick for the worst commander in Commander. Alright guys, so that was my list for the top 10 of my least favorite commanders to play against in Commander. If any of you guys have any of these decks, don't be offended by what I said. This is just my personal opinion. Also, as I said before, there are ways to build some of these decks in not the most unfun ways possible, but I was taking the majority of how the decks are built, or the ways that I've mainly seen them played. So hopefully you guys enjoyed. See you in the next one.